Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Community Development and Transportation Committee for November 17th, 2021. Would like to acknowledge the elected body present, Mayor Lori Henry, Councilmember Christine Hall, Councilmember Matt Judy, Councilmember Matthew Tizer, and Councilmember Marie Wilsey. For the viewing public and those present, the purpose of committee meetings are for the city departments to convey information to the mayor and council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of the city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance mandates the city administrator as the chair of committee meetings. While this is a public meeting, it is not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, and we certainly appreciate the members of the public who are present, we do not typically take public comments or questions during committee meetings. Public comments or questions are received at the regular city council meetings held at 7 o'clock p.m. in City Hall chambers on the second and fourth Monday of each month, and on the fifth Monday of each month there is an open forum. We do encourage citizens to engage our online platforms. If you have questions or need information regarding any matter, our staff is more than available and willing to provide that information to you. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for October 27th, 2021. I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
That was motioned by Councilmember Tizer, second by Councilmember Judy. I think I saw first there. All those in favor? Thank you. It's unanimous. The next item we have on our agenda is from the Community Development Department. Consideration of a memorandum of agreement between the City of Roswell and the Georgia Department of Community Affairs for the PlanFirst program.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. We just received our second renewal of the PlanFirst program, and with that, we have the memorandum of agreement that we have to sign and send back to the Department of Community Affairs. So it is in your packets. It has been reviewed by legal. Everything is in order. So we do need to place this on the November 29th council agenda. Due to the time factor that we have to get it back down to DCA the first part of December. So once it's agreed upon, placed on the agenda, voted on and approved, signed, we will be mailing it back down to the state so that we meet our time factor for that. And our PlanFirst renewal starts in January of 2022 and it extends for 3 years.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments from members of the elected body? Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what this program is and how often do we renew?
So we're required to renew every 3 years. So we send it down in May, and we just heard back in September, I think it was, when we got the news. The PlanFirst program, some of the items in the agreement, we're required to do a success story every year. We are also not technically required, but looked at really favorably if we send someone to the Community Planning Institute conference, which they just held last week, and we did have a planner at the conference, and I did a presentation. We are required to review new cities that come forward and want to be included within the PlanFirst program. So we're required to review their plans and also do site visits as well during that is normally held during the summer months. So that is part of our charge. There's also grants and everything related to this that we can take a look at, and other departments have used in the past related to, I think some of our water has used some of the grants in the past that we have gotten through for PlanFirst program. You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes.
Motion to approve.
All right. Motion to approve by Councilmember Judy. Do we have a second to move this forward? Second by Councilmember Wilsey. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All right. It is unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll move that item forward. The next item, also from Community Development, is the consideration of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, Sections 2.2.2 lots, 2.2.8 building setbacks, 2.2.19 residential garage parking, 2.2.20 residential parking location, 3.2.9 townhouse, 4.3.5 townhouse, 5.3.7 townhouse, 6.3.2 townhouse, 14.2 defined terms for the record, and
Good morning,
all right,
yes.
thank you.
Lenore Bromberg, Deputy Director of Community Development. Some quick background, just as a reminder, we've been talking about this for quite a while. Item was originally brought to committee in April. There's been some modifications to what was included in that discussion. It was deferred to the May committee. In May, it was deferred to June, just due to the time limit on the agenda that evening. In June, we did have some additional discussion, and a couple of other items were asked to be brought back to committee. Brought that in July, and it was taken to mayor and council, but then deferred back to a work session. In that work session, staff was given direction to limit it basically to the definitions, keeping the definitions in all the locations as opposed to consolidating them all into one location, as well as to make the modification to have only the 20-foot between the property line and the garage door, and I'll go through all of those very, very quickly. The one thing I will point out is that any of the definitions that were included in 14.2 do remain there. We've just made sure that the wording matches, and if they are in multiple locations, so that there's some consistency there. So the first thing is to add the definition for front property line here under lot, front property parcel or site boundary line coincident with a public or private street right-of-way or specified courtyard for cottage court. So there is no change to this. And we have removed the reference that we had considered at one time regarding the civic space. Rear property line is essentially opposite to the front property line. Corner lot, a lot abutting two or more streets at their intersection, is a corner lot. We brought these all to this location because they were located in other sections regarding setbacks as opposed to being in the actual definition of lot. For building setbacks, we've moved the definition to here so that we have it not only in the rest of the document, but for consistency, a line demarcating the required distance between a property line and the face of a building structure or accessory structure, and then the types of setbacks. Previously, instead of referring to a front setback, it was primary street, and then the side, rear, and side street. It has caused a lot of confusion because we would use those interchangeably, and it was not consistent through the document. So the recommendation was to use the word front instead of primary street, and that's been carried throughout the document. For setbacks, again, we're replacing the terms, as I just said, referring to the front, and then reordering these so that they make sense. On the corner lot is actually just moved down to number 3. We talked about the front, and then the rear, and then the corner. The one thing that we did change is the rear setback number. What was number 3 is now number 2. The rear setback is measured. That all stays the same, but we said right-of-way or access easement line because we do have situations where it's an access between the buildings as opposed to a dedicated public street. In addition, we've the rear property line is a property line opposite. We've moved that again up to that definition under lot as we saw just a moment ago. And then all lot lines which are not front or rear or side are considered side interior lots. And so those that matches with the definitions that you'll see the dimensions when you get into each of the zoning districts. And then, as we've talked about before, the term landscape was used here in number 5, and we don't have landscape buffers within the code. Is now referred to as neighborhood compatibility buffers. So just for consistency, we want to make sure this term is matched. On the residential garage parking townhouse, the only modifications here is to, instead of referring to alley, to make it match with the other terminology, we say access right-of-way or access easement. And then the 4-foot has been removed, and the minimum of 20 foot from the rear, from the rear property line or access easement line would be the definition for, and this is for rear-loaded townhouses. And then for front-loaded townhouses, again, minimum of 20 feet from the front property line to the garage door. I'm going to pause just for a second, and if there are any questions about those items before I move on.
Councilmember Hall?
Thank you. I don't know if you want to address this after, but I did have a question about the definitions on, for lot frontage.
So lot frontage is not changing at all.
Okay, and there were suggestions on adding a couple of points to that or other,
No, the last word we got was to not change it at all. The only addition we were making before was not to lot frontage, but to lot front property line. Lot frontage basically just says you have to have at least one line of a property touch a road. And then front property line is the definition of the front in order to determine the setbacks and how they match up with the tables when we talk about the building types.
okay, so you're recapping what we had discussed at the meeting?
Correct.
And not other information that I had sent
Correct.
subsequent to?
That's
Okay.
correct. Those items that you sent separately in that email were not ever discussed as a group at this body, and so they were not agreed upon based on our record of the information. So,
Thank you
yes,
for that clarification.
you're welcome.
Yes. Did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Wilsey.
Thank you. Yes, I think probably just to follow up on the question that Christine was asking. So the definition of lot frontage, giving an opportunity for it to face basically a green space is not being brought forward at this time.
That's correct, and that would be for the front property line definition, is where we had that. And so the direction was to remove that, ultimately hope that there's an opportunity to have council take some tours and go look at some suggestions. Jason and I have actually driven around. We went through one development that has actually all of the examples that we want to show. It's perfect. It does show kind of the idea behind what we were trying to present. And it's a matter of that being brought forward another time.
Okay, well, I just want to emphasize that I really hope that that happens, and it happens soon, because I think it's a real opportunity to improve the quality of the townhomes that we have in the city of Roswell, and also the aesthetics, and basically also just increasing green space, more green space, less pavement. So I just want to make sure that going forward that that is something that you continue to look at. Thank you.
All right, so just quickly, we've got a couple more things. The one I wanted to spend just a moment on, there was a discussion at the last meeting, and this, Councilmember Hall also goes to the stuff that we emailed back and forth about that was presented to us. And that was the recommendation or suggestion by others outside of this room to include an intent. We did discuss this at length with legal. There are no other intent statements included in this rules section of the code, and so our suggestion was to not include an intent. The idea here was that there aren't intents for rules. Rules are rules. Now, there are other sections or other models of this code that do include intent statements. So at the time, what we had suggested was to remove the word intent and just say the remainder of the regulation, because the only thing here that is an alternative compliance option is the garage door width in relation to the building width. If, as a part of the modifications to the UDC with the revisions to the comp plan, we want to consider doing intent statements for all of these things, then that could be something that we do collectively for all of them. And so that was the suggestion that legal and ComDev came together with based on the questions that were asked of us to look at. And then this is just to remove under the residential parking location. This says 20 feet from the sidewalk, which of course contradicts the 20 feet from the property line, so we just wanted to make sure we remove that contradiction. And then the building type standards, these are, for the most part, the definitions are the same throughout all these articles. There's some slight differences in the numbers, but in order to reflect everything that we just showed with those definitions, we wanted to show that there would be no changes under lot. And then for placement, we're referring to front setback instead of primary street. And then instead of alley, the rear access right-of-way or access easement. And again, it would only be the 20-foot minimum. And then on the, I think that's the only changes. And so that's carried through. This is 4.3.5. Again, just updating those definitions and removing the 4 feet for the rear access right-of-way or easement. And then same thing for 5.3.7. and 6.3.2. Those are the only modifications that happen in any of those sections, so there's no other changes to dimensions or terminology. And then we'll get to the defined terms. Again, we've left everything in here, so there's a lot less red, but we did make sure that lot line front, the front property line definitions both are consistently the same. And I believe that is it of the changes.
All right, yes, Knowledge Council Member Palermo.
Thank you. So, first of all, I just want you to know I was listening to the whole session on the Facebook on my way here. Thank you to the city clerk for seeing me on my run this morning and reminding me we changed the date for the committee. But so, on this item, at the last committee when we discussed it, we discussed separating it into two separate items. We discussed, because there was the item that had the consensus, which was fixing the driveway issue, where we found neighboring cities had policies that were much more manageable and leading to better developments related to parking, et cetera. And we discussed it being a separate item of the everything else. But from what I was seeing, reading, and hearing, is it sounds like it's been combined, and that's where I guess part of my confusion is, because there was the item that was clear and had consensus, and then there's all these other updates which again I feel need really a work session, a lot more discussion to make sure that there isn't really any unintended consequences or negative impacts from making any of the changes.
So the stuff that was removed was regarding the civic space and a lot of the flexibility that staff was trying to bring into the code in order to allow for the various options that we see actually built out there. And that was removed from this. But the definitions and the notes that we have was that there was consensus on the definitions as proposed except for that, and then the removing the 4 feet. So this was simply, the only thing we have done at this point is to make sure that the terms that are being used are correct throughout the document and are the correct terms to use. So for example, in some cases, we were measuring from a sidewalk, in other cases from a property line. It needs to be from the property line. It should not be from the sidewalk, because the sidewalk is in the public right of way, and we don't want their driveway to start in the, as far as their parking space, et cetera. So that is what we had, and then of course, looking at some of the examples out in the real world to then figure out what that other part of it would be. But that was the only thing it is left out of this, is the.
So another example of where I felt it needed more discussion was, I believe there's from a definition standpoint, we're changing at times. Is it the front property, or what was it regarding using the term front?
So
Or primary. So
Right.
we were changing the term primary to front, and it was my understanding that actually potentially did have an actual impact.
No, it does not. It doesn't change anything. So we just, instead of saying primary street setback, we refer to front. Because in the real world, we don't talk about primary street setback. Everybody comes into us and says, what's my front setback? And so the common terminology is to say front. So all we've done is, instead of saying front in some places and primary street in others, it's front everywhere. And you still would have a primary street. And if you're on a corner, one of those would be considered primary, one would be considered side. And it's gonna be based on the development that's out there and how it's either been platted or, there's all sorts of other things that are in there that help to help do that. So there isn't any fundamental change in the definitions. It's just clearly using words that are consistent throughout the document and are more applicable to the terminology that we use on a regular basis.
So now then changing it where we use the term front instead of primary, isn't that still, if there was a requirement before, because the whole thing that we're focusing on, we certainly want to encourage rear loaded instead of front loaded. And so I guess my concern is by changing it to front, which potentially could be more arbitrary, whereas in primary street is not arbitrary, that's something defined. Is there the risk that we're creating, looking at the backsides of more townhomes?
So the definition stays the same, it's just a different term. So the front property line has to be coincident with a public street. So front is primary street, they're the same. It's just that we're using front throughout the document instead of flipping back and forth between the two. So the definition, the term, so the primary street definition, actually, I'm not even sure it was defined, but a primary street setback is from the front of the lot But we were calling it a primary street setback, which was just terribly confusing for a lot of people when they tried to go through and figure out which way it was supposed to be. So so you still have to have lot frontage. Lot frontage is that you have to have one property line touch a public or private street right-of-way. That's all that means. That doesn't determine which way it faces. It just means it has to be on at least one front. Have one property line coincident with a street. Front property line then defines that the front has to be a public or private street right-of-way. So in that case, that means that for a townhouse, for example, it has to have a front on a street. So if you want to rear load it, you have to have another street. Or you would have to go to Board of Zoning Appeals to seek a variance for how your lot is oriented,
Okay.
which is currently what we're having folks go through once this was brought to staff's attention.
Thank you.
So hopefully that clears up. I know it's a lot.
Any further questions, clarifications needed from council? Yes, Councilmember Wilsey?
Yeah, so just a question, and I think, Mike, I completely agree with you that what we're trying to do is more rear-loaded, not front-loaded. And so that would have to do with the definition. A front property line does not necessarily correspond to the front facade, correct? I mean, I think that's where you get into a little sticky definitions that we need to be careful.
So
Further on in-
I know that term is being brought forward, and I don't think it's the right way to think about it.
Right.
You can make any side of the building look like a front. That's not what we're
Right.
trying to do. This is not architectural. This is
Sure.
functional.
Right.
There's got to be a front door or a pedestrian door, and the pedestrian door has to go to a street.
Right,
The garage door can either be on the front or the back, and there's going to be, if it's on the front, it can't exceed the 50% width of the building unit. If it's on the back, we don't care.
right.
So that's the way that it is currently structured. The issue at hand is that to have a rear-loaded unit in today's code, we're not changing this. This is not a change. In today's code, to have a rear-loaded unit, it has to also have a street on the other side. So you would have a road on both sides of every townhome unit to have rear-loaded in the way that the code is currently written. And we're not
That's what we're
changing any
moving
of that
forward,
at all.
right.
That's not being modified.
Right, okay. And that's what we were trying to add with the,
Correct.
Green
So
space.
that'll be a whole separate, we'll see if that's something that there's an interest in doing. But today, if someone wanted to do that, the Board of Zoning Appeals does have authority over changing that and saying, we love the fact this has a whole lot more green space and we want it to face this way.
Right.
And so would be the avenue that someone who wanted to do that would have to go through until another alternative is brought forward into the code.
awesome, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that front versus facade, so, perfect.
Any further questions or comments, clarifications needed from the elected body?
And we are looking for an agenda vote for this, to move forward as a text amendment.
Yes, so I will entertain then a motion to move this item forward. I have a motion from Councilmember Palermo. Do we have a second? We do not have a second at this time, and so that motion would fail. Are there any other motions or questions from council? All right. With that, I think we'll go back staff and have some further conversations and see how we might address these matters.
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much. Next item we have is from Transportation, excuse me. Consideration of a request by the Ashley Manor Subdivision to convert their two existing private streets to public roads and for the city of Roswell to assume ownership and future maintenance responsibility. Gentlemen, please.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. So this morning, this is the conversion of Ashley Manor streets from private to public. And by way of background, the HOA has worked with the city over a number of years, and it really is interesting. It goes back to 2016 when they converted their water system, or started the process of converting their water system and making it part of the city's system, which was successfully completed a couple years ago. They also had hoped to do the same process with their private streets, and we have a policy and procedure for going through that, which was initiated with transportation a couple of years ago, I believe, maybe at the beginning of this year, at the end of 2020. They've completed all of those requirements. In your package, there's a quick summary that I'm just verbally going to go through for the benefit of the public. They've completed an engineering assessment of what it would take to bring the sidewalks and streets up to city standards, and it's really just fixing some sidewalk repairs primarily and filling some additional sidewalk that was not required at the time the neighborhood was built. All of the rest of the street construction was built to city standards. They've retained a contractor, and they have a land disturbance pending to finish the remainder of that work to upgrade their system. That includes a 1-year warranty for the city, for the benefit of the HOA and the city, and they've retained an independent inspector to inspect the work as it's being done, and we will inspect it also. They've also committed to pay $42,000 towards future maintenance, repaving and whatnot associated with the public maintenance of the streets in the future, and provide a deed of dedication at the time of ownership transfer. The one thing that's not mentioned in the item per se is this also does include the transition of their power bills. The city covers the power bills for streetlights across the city, and that would be included here as well. That'll be just a billing transfer with the current provider for their subdivision. We recommend ownership transfer be accepted, subject to the completion of those conditions. And the one other item that we'd like to accomplish with this is we and legal have noticed that there's one sentence in our policy that really conflicts with the spirit of the policy, and when that is included as one of the attachments. This is a short policy that was written by staff in 2014, and it includes the sentence, and I'll just read it so you can understand the irony of this sentence, entitled Plats. Subdivisions designed, constructed, and platted as private shall forever remain private. There's a couple problems with that statement. It seems to contradict what we're trying to do with this policy. And number two, we really don't label or categorize subdivisions as public or private. We categorize streets that way. We categorize all kinds of things on the plats, but in no case could Lenore or I find an instance where we know of a subdivision that is platted as private. So with that, the red line markup of that one line is included for reference. We'll make that change. It's an operating policy, and I don't believe it requires any further action. Is that correct, Michael, on the policy change, or do we need to bring that back through council? Okay. Okay, we will do that along with this item, and we'll also do the same thing with our water policy, which includes the same statement. It also is not relevant there. Be happy to answer any questions you may have, and we do have representatives from the HOA here today if you have any questions directly for them.
Any questions from members of council? Mayor and council? Yes, Council Member Tizer.
If there's no questions, motion to approve.
Okay, motion to approve by Council Member Tizer, second by Council Member Palermo. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. We'll move this item forward. Next item.
Thank you.
Next item could be consideration for the mayor and or city administrator to sign an intergovernmental agreement between the Georgia Department of Transportation and the city of Roswell, Georgia, for the new traffic signal operations program known as Sigops. Yes, sir. Let's go forward.
I'll sure know how to clear a room.
So this is a very straightforward item. We have a signal operations program currently that is operated by Georgia Department of Transportation. This is called the Regional Transportation Operations Program. We've operated under it in conjunction with them for 10 years. This new program called the Traffic Signal Operations Program with a different acronym called Sigops is the replacement for that program. This is also a 10-year operating agreement, and the terms of that agreement really have not changed much. The agreement is slightly longer. We will be responsible for maintaining those signals along the state corridors, and it's a data sharing agreement that'll allow the state to use the data and us to use the data more more effectively to really manage traffic flow more proactively in the city. So we think it's a big step in the right direction. In your package, you have a little background on it, the old agreement and the new agreement, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on the program.
Any questions from members, mayor and council? Any questions, comments? All right, we'll entertain a motion to move this forward. Motion from Council Member Tizer, second from Council Member Judy. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you, and motion passes unanimously. We'll move this item forward. Next item is the consideration of a rectangular rapid flashing beacon on Crabapple Road.
So this item goes back some time also. On Crabapple Road, we are going to put up a couple of pictures of this. A couple of years ago, residents in the area requested the then director to install a crosswalk in this area to make it a little easier for residents of the community across the street to reach the other side of the street where there's a shopping center and a number of shops. Can you flip to the next one, Rob? That's the existing intersection. This is the location. So that's Crabapple Road, pretty close to the silos where Howes and Crabapple come together. Shopping center across the street is their main goal, and in the next slide it'll give you just an example of what we're asking and the residents are requesting to have installed now, which was one of the flashing beacons. They already have a crosswalk. The flashing beacons help to attract drivers' attention and get them to slow down and respect folks that happen to be in the crosswalk. The median is also already there as a little bit of a protective item. I'll be happy to answer any questions. These are about $10,000 to $15,000 max. And I believe we've put in one of these recently, and we do have the funding available from a couple of sources which are referenced in your item. Be happy to address any questions.
Yeah, any questions from mayor and council? Councilmember Judy?
Thank you. Having met with the residents over there, I know Councilmember Hall and Councilmember Wilsey has as well. It's an aging population in the orchards there. They walk across the street to Publix to get their groceries and shop, and they were very concerned and had a bunch of near misses there because it's a very busy stretch of road. And I think this rapid beacon will help protect them as they go across there to shop and patronize the stores over there and also exercise outside of their neighborhood. So I think this is I know we did one at Saddle Creek and also one there on Crabapple in front of Roswell Station as well. So I think they're very cost effective and will help keep the residents of the orchards and others crossing there safe.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. So I certainly fully support this. That being said, what I want to see from staff is how we make it easier and more clear for residents and neighborhoods to request things like this. So I do like the idea of making sure in Roswell we're making it more pedestrian friendly and certainly safer, and definitely want to make it easier for neighborhoods to know the process when they do want to request something like this. But again, I certainly support it.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, and thank you, Councilmember Palermo, for reading my mind. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think this is, an extremely walkable area and definitely, needs to be able to connect the communities to the shopping and dining areas. And if we could come up with a criteria or policy that neighborhoods could ask for one, what is the trigger that we would put that in and without, so that there's really just a straightforward process to bring it to council for consideration. So.
That's something we can definitely work on.
Absolutely. Yes, Mayor Henry.
The other thing that I think that we need to work on is education, because one of my concerns is, and I see it in my neighborhood all the time, that because it is so pedestrian friendly, that people forget that there are cars on the road, and it can be equally dangerous. So along with that policy, I would like to see an educational component to that, that lets people know that, there's still 4,000-pound vehicles on that road. And also a component to educate the drivers. Do you have to stop at these? Do you, what are the requirements? I think that would be helpful.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you. I encourage staff to, if we approve this at the committee, or at the next mayor and council meeting, get this one up as soon as you possibly can. Drove through here the other day. This crosswalk is not kind of in a natural place where you'd expect to see a crosswalk. As you can see, there's no intersection on the other side, and it sneaks up on you before you know it. And so I understand the residents' concern on this one, and so I'm very supportive of it, based especially on where it is, and that ought to be another one of the criteria when you put a future policy together. Is whatever the location is, but this one needs to get up as soon as we can get it up there. And so, oops, there's a question. Okay.
Is that okay?
Say,
All right.
if there is no further discussion, I'd like to make a motion to move this forward.
All right. Councilmember Tizer has made a motion to move forward. Councilmember Hall has made a motion to second the item. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. The motion passes unanimously, and we'll move this item forward and also take in under advisement the comments and recommendations of the mayor and council. Next item is the consideration of a resolution to apply for a grant to the State Road and Tollway Authority in the amount of $2 million.
So it's always good when we see an opportunity to apply for a grant in this amount. And the State Road and Tollway Authority grant has a potential return of $2 million to the city. The applications for this program are due very shortly on December 15th, so we do not have a tremendous amount of time. We believe that the Historic Gateway Project is an ideal fit for this particular grant application. And we had, in 2019, gone through the funding application that would provide $8 million in new federal dollars through the Atlanta Regional Commission, and it requires a $2 million local match. This grant could offset that local match, which we had planned on providing through T-SPLOST funding. So we're very excited about the prospect of being able to redirect those funds elsewhere if we're successful and can secure this grant. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about that application and look forward to getting it in before the deadline.
Any questions from mayor and council regarding this item? Yes, council member. Motion to move forward by Councilmember Hall, second by Councilmember Tizer. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That passes unanimously, and we'll move that item forward. Next item on the agenda is a consideration of a resolution to submit a local maintenance and improvement grant known as LMIG project list for fiscal year 2021 to the Georgia Department of Transportation, and to accept the LMIG funds for $933,205.35 from GDOT. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So it's that time of year again. This is an annual program that I think you are all familiar with. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to address them. This particular item really just specifies our proposed roads to use with this year's local maintenance and improvement grant funding, and that's primarily King Road in a couple of sections, Mansell Road, and Warsaw Road off of Mansell. Those roads are prioritized by our normal process, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, and Joe, who does the prioritization here, will answer them if they're hard questions. So, address them. Do you have any questions?
Any questions from mayor and council? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion to approve, move forward. Yes, Councilmember Tizer.
Motion to move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall, second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Passes unanimously. We'll move this item forward. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Final item we have on the agenda is placed here in part due to a timing issue. Consideration to award a contract to Center for Public Safety Management LLC for professional services in the amount not to exceed $62,000 for an audit gap analysis of the Roswell Fire Department. This is from Public Safety Fire and will be presented by Chief Panino. Sir.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I appreciate you hearing this item off-cycle. We're trying to get this study approved and completed in time for FY23 budget recommendations. I'll refer to the Center of Public Safety Management as CPSM as I discuss some of this. We met with the vendor yesterday, and I wanted to provide some more detail about the scope of the study, which I think you'll find is pretty extensive. This item ties directly to the city's strategic plan, key objective number 1, under the goal safe and secure community, which is conduct a professional audit/gap analysis of our fire service, where we are now and where we need to be. This comprehensive agency evaluation will include an analysis of the fire department staffing model, service delivery, and personnel management. The evaluation and recommendations that arise from this study will be compliant with industry best practices, including National Fire Protection Association standards, ISO schedules, the Center for Public Safety Excellence, and all applicable federal and state mandates. Regarding the staffing evaluation and personnel management, CPSM will review and analyze all department programs and services, conduct an evaluation of management practices, including administrative capabilities, staffing, workflows, and an evaluation of best practices for each operational division. They will determine apparatus and staffing patterns and, of course, evaluate our current staffing model to see if it still meets the needs of our community. Relating to service delivery and performance, CPSM will conduct a community risk assessment and evaluate the department's capabilities to respond to these risks. They'll review historical system performance, evaluate the use of automatic aid and mutual aid, and review and analyze the current ISO community rating report. They will conduct an evaluation of response times, workload, both at the station level as well as the individual unit level, peak workload hours, operational response, resiliency, and measure service delivery performance to help develop response standards moving forward. CPSM will also project future system demand and service delivery needs. Some areas they will evaluate include predicted demographic changes, census data, future land use, development activities, and growth projections. They will identify how future growth will impact performance and what measures should be taken to ensure effective performance into the future. Finally, they'll complete a needs analysis for future fire stations and locations, as well as the need for maintenance, repairs, or expansion of our current facilities. In addition to the agency evaluation, CPSM will make operational recommendations to assist in establishing direction and priorities to help us focus on critical actions, improve resource utilization, increase efficiency, and reduce redundancy. Going back to our strategic plan, this will create a blueprint to get from where we are now as a fire department and where we need to be in the future. 6 vendors submitted proposals for this project, though there were several that the selection committee felt were capable of completing the study. The panel unanimously selected CPSM. CPSM has conducted approximately 350 similar studies for agencies such as the Roswell Police Department in 2018, Alpharetta Public Safety, Johns Creek Fire, and the Sandy Springs Police Department. We checked 3 of CPSM's references, including Kern County, California, Las Vegas, Nevada, and Bullock County, Georgia, all of which rated CPSM as an 8 out of 10 or better, indicated that the study met their needs, and they all indicated that they would do business with CPSM in the future. From my perspective, still being relatively new to the city, I think this is the ideal time to get this study done as we set the future direction of the fire department. The department recommends moving this item to the November 29th Mayor and Council meeting for consideration for approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yes, members of council, any questions for Chief Panino? Yes, sir. Mayor, or Councilmember Judy.
Thank you. Thank you for the very thorough explanation, and this is very important. being liaison this year, learning all that we need to do and looking to the future under your leadership. I think this is very necessary, so appreciate you bringing forward on motion to approve.
All right, we do have a motion from Council Member Judy. Do we have a second? Second for Council Member Hall. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. It moves forward unanimously, and thank you very much, Chief Benino. We do not have any further business on the agenda. With that, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Council Member Judy, second by Council Member Wilsey. All those in favor? Thank you all so much for a very productive meeting.